Here is every major country the United States has invaded, occupied, or militarily intervened in throughout its history. Not just declared wars. Not just peacekeeping missions. Every significant military action where American forces entered foreign territory with the intent to fight, occupy, or reshape a government. This is the story of how a republic built on revolution became a global military power with troops stationed in over 150 countries. Let us start from the beginning. How America got an empire, the Spanish-American War 1898. In 1898, Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain. American newspapers ran stories about Spanish soldiers starving Cuban civilians in camps, and public pressure to step in kept building. Then in February the American battleship USS Maine blew up in Havana Harbor and killed 266 sailors. No one knew what caused it, but newspapers blamed Spain and the country went to war. While the war was starting, American officials found Filipino leader Emilio Aguinaldo in Hong Kong and made him a deal. If he helped the U.S. beat Spain, they would back Philippine independence. So Aguinaldo came back on a U.S. Navy ship, helped take Manila, and his people wrote a constitution and set up their own government. The first one like it in Asia. The war lasted about 4 months and Spain lost almost everywhere it fought. At Manila Bay, an American fleet destroyed every Spanish ship without losing a single one of its own. And in Cuba the fighting was over in days. Spain signed the Treaty of Paris and handed the United States Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines for $20 million. Cuba became independent, but the deal let America send troops back in whenever it wanted and gave it a naval base at Guantanamo Bay. The Philippines did not get independence at all. It went to America. On February 4, 1899, an American soldier shot a Filipino on a bridge in Manila. And within hours, U.S. forces opened fire across the city. Many of the soldiers sent over had just finished the Indian Wars and brought the same tactics. They forced whole villages into camps and burned crops and homes to the ground. They tortured prisoners with something called the water cure, forcing water down a person's throat until they talked or passed out. On the island of Samar, after Filipino fighters killed 48 Americans in a surprise attack, a general ordered his men to kill every male over the age of 10. Over 4,200 Americans and 20,000 Filipino soldiers died. The camps, the burning, and the destroyed food supply killed as many as 1 million Filipino civilians. The war was declared over in 1902, but the fighting went on until 1913. The Philippines stayed under American control for 44 years until independence came in 1946. Puerto Rico and Guam are still American territories today. Mexico, the Border Wars 1910s. When revolution tore through Mexico in 1910, American troops crossed the border multiple times to protect American business interests and citizens. In 1914, U.S. forces occupied the port city of Veracruz for 7 months after a minor diplomatic incident. The fighting killed over 150 Mexicans and 19 Americans. Then in 1916, Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa raided the town of Columbus, New Mexico, killing 17 Americans. President Woodrow Wilson sent General John Pershing and 10,000 troops into Mexico to hunt Villa down. They chased him for 11 months. They never caught him. But they fought multiple battles with Mexican forces, killed dozens of civilians, and nearly triggered a full-scale war. The expedition was pulled back in 1917 when America entered World War I. The invasion of Europe, World War II, 1944 to 1945. By June 1944, America had been fighting in World War II for 2.5 years, but most of Europe was still under Nazi control. The Soviets had been fighting Germany from the east and losing millions. So they kept pushing the Americans and British to invade from the west and force Germany to fight on two sides. The Allies spent months building a fake army in England out of inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and fake radio signals to make the Germans think the landing would happen at a completely different beach. It worked so well that even after the real invasion started, the Germans kept an entire army waiting in the wrong place for 7 weeks. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, over 156,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. Over 73,000 were American. The fighting was brutal. Thousands died on the beaches. But the invasion succeeded. Within months, American forces, along with British and Canadian troops, had liberated France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. By May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe cost over 400,000 American lives. But it also established the United States as the dominant military power in the West. American troops stayed in Europe permanently. And they are still there today. Korea, the Forgotten War, 1950 to 1953. In June 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The United Nations called for intervention, and the United States led a coalition to push them back. What was supposed to be a quick operation turned into a 3-year war. American forces pushed the North Koreans back to the Chinese border. Then China sent hundreds of thousands of troops across the border. The war turned into a brutal stalemate. Entire cities were leveled. Over 36,000 Americans died. Over 1 million Korean civilians were killed. The war ended in 1953 with an armistice. Not a peace treaty. Technically, the war never ended. American troops stayed in South Korea. And they are still there today. Over 28,000 of them. Vietnam, the war that changed everything, 1955 to 1975. America's involvement in Vietnam started small. A few advisors. A few hundred troops. By 1965, it was a full-scale war. Over 500,000 American troops were deployed at the peak. The goal was to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The strategy was to bomb North Vietnam into submission and support the South Vietnamese government. It did not work. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics. They hid in jungles. They blended in with civilians. And they refused to give up. The United States dropped more bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia than were used in all of World War II. They used napalm. They used Agent Orange, a chemical defoliant that poisoned the land and caused birth defects for generations. Over 58,000 Americans died. Over 2 million Vietnamese civilians were killed. And in 1975 the United States withdrew. Saigon fell. Vietnam was reunified under communist rule. It was the first war America clearly lost. And it changed how the country thought about military intervention forever. Grenada, the invasion nobody remembers, 1983. In October 1983, the United States invaded the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada. The official reason was to protect American medical students after a coup overthrew the government. The real reason was to prevent Grenada from becoming a communist ally of Cuba and the Soviet Union. The invasion lasted less than a week. American forces quickly overwhelmed Grenadian and Cuban forces. 19 Americans died. 45 Grenadian soldiers and 24 Cuban fighters were killed. The government was replaced with one friendly to the United States. And American troops left within weeks. It was a small operation. But it signaled that the United States was willing to invade countries unilaterally if it saw a communist threat in its hemisphere. Panama, capturing Noriega, 1989. Manuel Noriega was a Panamanian military dictator. And for years he was on the CIA payroll. But by the late 1980s he had become a liability. He was involved in drug trafficking. He was destabilizing Panama. And he was no longer useful. In December 1989, the United States invaded Panama with over 27,000 troops. The operation was called Just Cause. The goal was to capture Noriega and install a new government. The fighting lasted a few weeks. Noriega was captured and brought to the United States to stand trial. He was convicted on drug charges and spent the rest of his life in prison. Over 200 Panamanian civilians were killed. Some estimates go as high as 3,000. The United States installed a friendly government. And the Panama Canal remained under American influence until it was fully handed over to Panama in 1999. The Gulf War, Iraq, 1991. In August 1990, Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait. The United Nations demanded withdrawal. Iraq refused. In January 1991, a coalition of 35 countries, led by the United States, launched Operation Desert Storm. The air campaign lasted 6 weeks. American aircraft flew over 100,000 sorties. Baghdad was bombed relentlessly. Iraqi infrastructure was destroyed. Then the ground invasion began. It lasted 100 hours. Iraqi forces were overwhelmed. Kuwait was liberated. The coalition stopped at the Iraqi border. Saddam Hussein remained in power. Over 200 Americans died. Estimates of Iraqi deaths range from 20,000 to over 100,000, including thousands of civilians. The war demonstrated American military dominance. But it also left unfinished business, which would lead to another invasion 12 years later. Somalia, Black Hawk Down, 1992 to 1995. Somalia was in chaos. Civil war. Famine. Warlords controlling the country. In 1992, the United Nations sent peacekeepers. The United States sent troops to help distribute food and stabilize the country. But the mission expanded. American forces tried to capture a Somali warlord named Mohammed Farah Aidid. On October 3, 1993, a raid in Mogadishu went wrong. 2 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. American soldiers were pinned down in the city for hours. 18 Americans were killed. Over 500 Somalis died in the fighting. The images of dead American soldiers being dragged through the streets shocked the country. American forces withdrew from Somalia in 1995. The mission was considered a failure, and it made the United States more cautious about interventions in the future. Afghanistan, the longest war, 2001 to 2021. On September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked the United States. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. The Taliban government in Afghanistan was harboring Al-Qaeda. The United States demanded they hand over Osama bin Laden. The Taliban refused. On October 7, 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan. The Taliban government fell within weeks. But the war did not end. It turned into a 20-year occupation. The goal was to rebuild Afghanistan, to establish a stable government, to prevent terrorism. It did not work. Over 2,400 American service members were killed. Over 100,000 Afghan civilians died. The war cost over $2 trillion. In August 2021, the United States withdrew. The Taliban retook the country in days. It was the longest war in American history. And it ended with the same group in power that was there in 2001. Iraq, the second invasion, 2003 to 2011. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. The official reason was that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to terrorism. Neither turned out to be true. The real reasons were more complex. Regional influence. Unfinished business from 1991. The invasion took 3 weeks. Baghdad fell quickly. Saddam Hussein was captured and later executed. But the occupation lasted 8 years. Insurgents fought American forces. Sectarian violence tore the country apart. Over 4,500 Americans died. Estimates of Iraqi civilian deaths range from 100,000 to over 500,000. The war destabilized the region. It created a power vacuum. And it led to the rise of ISIS. American combat troops left in 2011. But thousands of troops remain in Iraq today. The pattern. From the Philippines to Iraq. From Mexico to Afghanistan. The United States has invaded, occupied, or intervened militarily in dozens of countries. Some interventions were justified. Some were not. Some succeeded. Most did not end the way they were supposed to. What these interventions reveal is a pattern. The United States uses military force to protect its interests, to prevent the spread of ideologies it opposes, to secure resources, to maintain global dominance. And the consequences, intended or not, shape the world we live in today. American troops are currently stationed in over 150 countries. The military budget is larger than the next 10 countries combined. And the debate over when, where, and why to use that power continues. Because every invasion, every occupation, every intervention leaves a mark. On the countries invaded. And on the country doing the invading.